Well, it seems that talking every day for 10 minutes really puts a strain on your mind, uh, especially if you're trying to um, keep yourself within the limits of a subject. So, last video was about Ayn Rand applied to the business of a student and how a student invests uh, the few resources he has and use it as some competitive advantage. In other words, how a student decides to go to some class instead of the other and decides to study something instead of not studying it every single day for the rest of his life. Because if you really want to talk about the ideal student, the idealistic, the form of a student, the original student, then it must apply for the rest of his life. Um, in my case, it does, because physics student is not to be expected an early retirement from studying in the next 100 years. So let's see how YouTube manages their resources. It's not necessarily a good management, but I can tell you that they are not looking for more content from everyone, but instead they look for specialists making content every day, as compared to people who are more likely to post once in a while. And it's not about people watching their own videos as well. And I can prove this because I can go here on my YouTube channel, and you can see that there is no text talking about my channel itself. There is a image or the profile picture of my channel, and if you click on it outside of YouTube, it shows your account. It shows a very simple box saying the name of your account, or your name, your email, and the options add account, sign out, and then my account in blue. So you expect this to be the same thing for the same functionality for YouTube, but it's not. And when you click on it outside of YouTube, actually when you hover your mouse on it, or above it, over it, outside of YouTube, the icon in your mouse, in your pointer, is changed to a hand or something else, indicating that you can click on it. However, if you do the same on YouTube, it doesn't change. And let's see, I took pictures to prove this. A small trouble. And you can see by comparing that if I hover the mouse over the bell icon on the left of the right top corner of the screen on YouTube page, and it shows notifications, but nothing if I just hover it on my icon. They certainly don't want you to be messing with production of videos if you're not willing to pay the psychological price of looking for things that are not easy to find. So does that mean that YouTube wants to increase quality of their videos? Sure, they want to increase quality and volume, They want to make sure that every channel has a sustained performance, and maybe you can do something like that within your day-to-day schedule. Maybe if you increase the difficulty for something that could be competing with something else, and this something else is more likely to be of better quality, then you're certain to limit the lack of quality and quantity. It's a very general way of saying it, but I can think of at least three specific ways, and I'm sure that three specific ways of applying it, and I'm sure that anyone can think of some if they put their minds on it for 10 minutes. Another thing that is probably very important is to map what you do every day, and you can do it the hard way. That is, you can keep a log of everything you do in a day, and of course that's very complicated because it's really hard to describe what you do, and maybe there's some little differences, and it's probably a good thing in the long term. But you must also understand that the future you thinks different than you right now, and certainly making or expecting the future you to read old stuff is also another challenge. So not only do you have to write it, you also have to read it later on. So there's probably an easy way, and the easy way to map what you do is to do some internet tests. Probably the easiest one I can think of is a personality test. In my example, I am an ENTJ. That is what's called a commander personality. And here's something that really makes a good impression to me. If someone says that happiness lies in the joy of achievement, or your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life, that is very appealing, because for some reason, thinking that my time is limited and I have to put it at different places, and there is either a good feedback or bad feedback from that, it makes me feel good. And also, don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of others people's thinking. I can imagine some people reading that and not understanding right away. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. Sure. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. So yeah, intuition is something that I talked about already, and maybe I'm biased by talking about it. Maybe this series of videos is very biased in the with the concern that it should be effective for everyone, right? If I'm thinking about effectiveness, certainly I need to make a series of video for every single type. But this just feels the best way. It's it's a very verbal, self-explanatory way of putting things in a straightforward manner that leaves no holes behind. Let me see something else. Maybe another good advice would be to stop watching movies, and this might be a great advice actually. If you refrain from doing things, if you're able to refrain from doing things, and you're left with almost nothing to do, then certainly it comes natural to you that you're going to be a good student. And I'm using the student archetype, but I'm really interested in intelligence as the general thing. It's just that the practical way of thinking of intelligence is within a student and teacher framework. Certainly, since we can't talk about teachers very much, we probably should focus on students. Yeah. I can do a quick rundown on 3 different fields, including mine, that would be considered deep. And okay, so the first one would be that of goal-oriented action in thought, and that's best. That's the best way of describing an ENTJ, and also the best way to describe Western thought, Western culture more. And there's also the belief of Socrates that's different from that, surprisingly enough. And Socrates, for example, believed that all virtue is knowledge, and that virtue is sufficient for happiness. That and people say that Socrates was an INTP. That is, he wouldn't make judgments as fast as J-types, as they call it. He would, instead of making plans ahead of time, he would leave it to last-minute improvisation. So virtue is sufficient for happiness. And this is one of the Socratic paradoxes, by the way. And the third one would be an even further position. Virtue is not knowledge, but virtue is sufficient for happiness. And it's also not, certainly not action. Certainly not goals. And it's something like the Oriental view. I don't know if it's really Oriental, because I'd have to know deeply how to differentiate between the different schools of Oriental thought. But from what I know about Buddhism and from what I know about Asian cultures as a whole, they are different than the Western cultures. They're not as industrial. They even call us industrial. We don't even have the word for it, because it's the normal here. It used to be the normal here. But they can identify it because they have a contrast, and this contrast happens between the Western culture and their Buddhist meditation oriented non-judgmental culture. That is, virtue is non-judgment. So okay, so maybe we can wrap it up into 3 things that will be more explained in the next video tomorrow. Virtue is judgment. The second, virtue is knowledge. And the third, virtue is non-judgment. Alright.